Hello again, apologies for another late video. Today we should talk about nuance and positions. Now, I've already addressed some level of understanding for nuance and mentioned them in other videos. However, the point about slight differences and how they affect Now, slight differences impact the end result of views. It's good to look further and more directly at it. For one, again, nuance is slight differences in something. So, for example, if someone says, I support thing A could be anything. Could be invading the world, could be abolishing taxes, could be a number of things. The grand scheme of thing would be the just plan itself. I want to do this through this method. Now, the nuances are how that goes about being implemented. For example, while the main plan is this, the actual implementation involves this, this, and this. To give an example, and using something I'm familiar with, abolishing taxes is a common plan that a lot of people have, assuming they are generally on the conservative side of the spectrum for politics. Now, let's say this is the main idea. Okay. Well, the nuances comes from how people wish to deal with that in their actual planned implementations. Some wish to use tariffs. Others wish to abolish the state itself. And then, of course, there are plans like mine, which involve using a permanent fund. The nuances between these positions is the slight variations in how that would function. So if you have this plan to achieve this goal, the nuance is how it differentiates from this plan to achieve the same goal. Same here. The variation impacts efficiency. More than that, it clarifies a lot of things. For example, if your plan is to abolish, what should you abolish instead? Actually, better idea. Let's say you want to establish something. Let's say you want to establish a charity. The nuance in it comes from, of course, the methods. For example, just fundraising, making a business, or maybe even setting up a branch of an existing charity. You'd still say that's establishing a charity in part, but it is different from, say, going to people and asking for funds, or making your own business so you can fund said charity. It also has to do with motives, too. A person who wishes to establish a charity to get out of trouble is going to be perceived differently than someone who is doing it out of general goodwill. And all these things can and sometimes should be taken into account. Now, nuance does not ignore the grand scheme of things. If a policy is better, no ifs, ands, or buts. Let's say there's a policy that is unequivocally better, like abolishing serfdom, getting rid of slavery. Why someone wants to do it doesn't matter nearly as much. Now, you can worry about the policies they wish to implement after that. For example, a socialist who wishes to abolish slavery and serfdom only to establish a collectivized, controlled economy. Like, you can complain about the end plan that they have, but the current proposal that they have to abolish these things, no matter how much nuance there is to their position, it's still a good idea. And that's the thing. Nuance does not overwrite effects. More specifically, it doesn't overwrite the goal. It doesn't matter which of these plans you adopt, eventually taxation's gonna be gone. Now, how effectively people handle it once we get there is another matter. But assuming it's abolishing taxes without worry for the budget, so the budget's fine, then it's objectively better. Because less taxation means more money in the people's hands, which means they can live better lives. So it is a good thing, net. Now, each of these here comes from a different perspective. For example, if you were to fill in who this would be, I guarantee you probably could pretty easily. That's usually your MAGA types or other people who stand on the more traditional way of believing. This is because America Firsters tend to take a lot from our past. And we did indeed rely on tariffs for a lot of our income for a decent amount of our history. However, we also didn't have as bloated a bureaucracy as we did now. So in order to afford the tariffs, you'd practically have to abolish every single major institution that the federal government has and shrink our military. Not a very productive thing, but if it's done, you could absolutely abolish taxation and go straight to tariffs. Now, this one is, of course, people like me. In fact, that's pretty much my plan in a nutshell, is this. I haven't really heard many people saying similar things, but I would be shocked if some did. And then, of course, this is the libertarian, specifically the anarcho-capitalist plan. They want to abolish taxation and form a bunch of private communities where everyone pays dues voluntarily, so they choose where to live directly and pay their dues accordingly to fund infrastructure or give out charity so that others don't have to pay and everyone can live accordance to their values of non-aggression and free trade and free enterprise. Essentially, the anarcho-capitalists trust the people to run themselves and organize into private communities, and so they wish to abolish the state and taxes in the process in an effort to decentralize and eventually take control of their lives, in their view. Now, the nuances between these positions characterizes who you're dealing with. You could very much tell which political spectrum, like which part of it, someone is on by learning why they want to do a lot of things, or their methods to do so. For example, if someone says people are starving, and you have people proposing raising the minimum wage, increasing competition and job growth, cutting taxes, and, let's say, seizing the means of production, you can pretty much tell where on the political spectrum most of those people are, at least to a relative degree. Nuance is those slight variations. And those variations allow for, well, plain and simply, a characterization of the true position. Because with that slight variation, it's like shifting slightly in one direction or the other from the initial point. So let's say the idea to abolish taxes, assuming this is the political compass, let's say it's here. It's a far more libertarian position. And this will be 3, 2, and 1. Now this one is over here. This one is way over here. And of course, that one's there. Now, as you can see, the reasons, or the methods rather, shift the general position that this would be. And these differences, however slight, could be merely a matter of the fine print and the exact management, or as big as all this, they define and characterize the plan someone makes. That may sound rather bad, especially given I'm not very good at explaining things, but that is the general gist of it. When looking at someone's beliefs, it's not good to paint with the same brush. For example, I straight up believe in imperialism. I believe imperialism is a good thing. Should you use me and my exact beliefs on how countries should run colonies and imperial territories and apply it to every single imperialist that came before and is going to come after? No. Especially because I couple my belief of imperialism with a belief in natural law to say that the empire must enforce the natural laws of its colonial subjects, not just those in the metropole. That is a very big thing for me. So painting that brush on every imperialist would be so wrong it's not even funny. Yeah, I don't think the Soviet Union, when it was conquering the East, was thinking, yeah, we should preserve the natural rights of its citizens. Or, the British were thinking, yeah, those Kenyans totally deserve the free speech that we have over here in Britain to say that we shouldn't rule over there. Completely. Totally. The fact is, when it comes to imperialism, and every position really, those different reasons and justifications for why someone believes in something characterizes the point of it. For example, if you ask both a Republican and a Democrat, guarantee you're most likely going to hear a support for a republic or a democracy. Now, I don't think people are using democracy properly, but let's just say democracy counts. Both sides are going to support one of those, if not both. It's why that defines it. For the conservatives, it's mostly a matter of tradition. It's why they tend to support the Electoral College. However, for those more on the liberal end of the spectrum, they support it because they believe it gives more freedom, more opportunity, and more of a voice. As a result, they are far more in favor of things like abolishing the Electoral College, going to ranked choice, things like that. Then there are, of course, people like me who support similar policies to the liberals on the Electoral College and ranked choice voting, but I would want to do it because I believe if we don't, people could shoot each other, so, slight differences. Yeah, I kind of have a weird set of policies, if we're being honest. But regardless, you can definitely see the differences in justification for an idea. It's why it's bad, especially when it comes to criticism, to just paint everyone as one thing. For example, let's use media because a lot of people have seen media criticism. There are those who make videos saying, insert thing is bad. It could be an animated series, maybe it could be Marvel, could be a whole lot of things. And plenty of them dislike the media. For example, there was the woke epidemic, where a lot of people were calling things woke and complaining about common tropes that they associated with the movement. Regardless of how true it is, even those people had differences in how they viewed things. For example, a professional writer who looks at modern leftists and sees them basically mutilating story tropes and conventions in order to serve their own political or social goals is going to react one way, versus a person who is very, very traditionalist reacting the other, because any association with, say, the gays in anything is going to lead to them basically throwing a hissy fit. And I use the gays ironically here, but honestly, it really doesn't matter because that's how they view it, and they're welcome to be their own little weird people over there. Not my problem. Certainly, the homophobes. Meh. But back to the point. In those discussions, there are a lot of different perspectives. Some who are just outright, this is absurd, abolish it, to those who are like, you're not telling your story as well, and this is only enhancing the problems. However, a lot of people would like to paint with one brush, because then they can summarize all the critiques as either based people fighting against the liberals or a bunch of freaking sexist racists who don't know what they're talking about. That's how a lot of people handled it, and it resulted in basically painting with the same brush. So you had people who were actually sexist being labeled the same as those who did not care about feminist issues or even supported those issues, but didn't support how they were implemented into a story. And that's the thing. Recognizing those differences in how someone came to a conclusion, one, but also how that impacts their current position is very important. You could have the exact same positions, verbatim, with another person. But if your justifications are different, that's gonna impact how you implement it. You and I could both argue for a reduction in taxes. I could do it because we're out of debt and I believe it's time to start reducing taxes and balance the budget. You could want to do it because you dislike the existence of taxes. Don't blame me on that last part, but just saying. That belief system where one of us is using one reason and the other is using a different one is going to impact how things are implemented and how far they will go. For example, the traditionalist is going to push far, far farther in terms of removing any trace of what they consider to be woke from media than the writer. If the professional writer is looking at things, they're going to say, okay, what writing tropes are they using? How effectively are they using it? Stuff like that. They're going to say, alright, remove this, we're good. Make it actual good writing, we're good. The traditionalist is going to want to scrape the freaking page until it's basically empty and devoid of anything that reminds them of progressives. That is a very real difference in terms of policy. Sure, the opposition to woke are very real in both. However, the reasons for it are massively different. In politics, it's the same. There are Republicans and Democrats who agree on a lot of similar positions. Some are due to shared beliefs, others are due to differing but converging beliefs. You're not going to see a lot of Republicans critiquing the idea of, censoring people who speak bad about Israel because they believe it to be anti-Semitism, and they are very firmly in support of the state. Democrats, on the other hand, like to claim themselves to be against anti-Semitism, so for them, censorship to protect Israel is the same there. If they can play it up to be not anti-Semitic, or if they believe it's actually anti-Semitic to just talk Israel, and so try to enforce their beliefs there because they're not opposed to censorship, well, there are differences, but they're going to agree, and things are going to get done. Meanwhile, the free speech sections of both of their parties are going to say, hold up, wait a minute. Why are you allowing them to do that? Why are you censoring for someone's opinions on a state? And so they're going to say, no, we shouldn't implement that free speech. While the Zionists are going to naturally support the idea, those who straight up want Israel to not exist are going to go far against it. But not for the reason that it's censorship. They're going to go against it for the fact that it supports Israel. Similarly, those who hate Israel because they hate the Jews, and they say Israel is the state of the Jews, well, those people straight up don't want Israel to exist. They're not going to argue for those censorship measures. In fact, they're going to argue for actively fighting against them. The fact is, it's not good to paint with one brush because how each person is going to go about a policy and how each person responds to the situation at hand is very important. You're not going to see everyone implement the same things even if they want the same outcome. I guarantee you, 99% of people who get into politics want a better world. Maybe they want it more specific, family, country, state even. But they want to better the lives of other people. How they get there is a different matter. I guarantee you, you could find nearly half of Congress had initial goals that were semi-benevolent. Maybe not too benevolent, but semi there. There was some kernel of a wish to make lives better. But they found the power very useful and so opted for more selfish paths, generally speaking. And that's the thing. People's choices, number one, heavily are impacted by their personality and beliefs already. But also, even if everyone's going for the same goal initially, how they perceive their position and how they aim to get there could very easily result in people breaking off. Or, depending on it, could result in people who want the same goal going totally opposed in how they want to do it. For example, my proposal involving austerity measures is literally the polar opposite of the libertarian response. The libertarians want to abolish the state itself. The shrinking of the state only to raise more taxes is basically the opposite of that. It's saying, I get it's theft, or I don't care it's theft. I'm taking your money. Now go shove it. I need to pay off my debts. It's a completely different thing. The libertarians and I are mutually opposed on that issue. Meanwhile, due to my more laissez-faire nature, I am definitely opposed to the progressives and their constant attempts to regulate the economy. Now, both the progressive and I, and the libertarian, we may all want a better world. It could be for any number of people. But how we go about it is different. Nuance matters. You could have the exact same goal, yet end up in a very different position. The same goal. Does not mean same conclusion. Have a good one. Oh, and maybe actually subscribe or like, I don't know. I'm bored.